Let's now bring in Dr. Keitumetse Mashego. She's a clinical and a sports psychologist, and she joins us now, of course, to weigh in on the World Suicide Prevention Day. Thank you so much for your time this afternoon. So when you look at the fact that over 700,000 people commit suicide annually across the globe, and given that this is all about prevention, I want us to first talk about the risk factors that contribute to suicidal ideation, Doctor.
Good afternoon, and good afternoon to the listeners. With suicide, unfortunately, the younger are also at risk nowadays. So it's not just adults who are at risk to commit suicide. So we really have to bear in mind the type of stresses at each developmental stage. So, for example, the younger would be more at risk because of peer pressure, for example, bullying from the school, the fellow schoolmates, or even, their family stresses. Even things like your exam results can cause a lot of stress in the young ones, but coming also into what is happening with the unemployment rate in our economy, the state of our economy now in South Africa, and also, all the other stresses that adults or even the young adults are exposed to that can put them at risk for suicidal ideation or completion. And, we also have to bear in mind that mental health challenges such as your anxiety and your depression, severe depression, can also be a causal factor when it comes to suicide completion.
And having said that, it does then become very important to identify, I would imagine, warning signs of suicide, especially in loved one, as you say, as we continue, of course, to learn about these warning signs to look out for when we talk about family members and even co-workers. And equally important, of course, is how to offer support. Perhaps you can weigh in on that factor.
Some of the symptoms that people can look out for is just, their behavioral changes. And because people are not the same, some people would become, for example, if they were outgoing, they'll become more withdrawn. Some it's the other way around. Maybe they were a little bit reserved and now they are very spontaneous in the life of the party. So I think just the change in behavior of a person, the behavioral patterns, and also their sleeping patterns. It could be that it's now that they just don't have the energy to do anything, or they're not sleeping enough. They're just more restless and they're just uncomfortable in, their existence basically, or their skin. But also just looking at their appetite as well and the things that they say. People who are at that point where they feel like nothing is going well for them, they would have comments about life just being not worth living, or their own life, and as just being exhausted, with just living life from a day-to-day basis. So we really need to just bear in mind, that people present differently, but just to look at that individual cases and look at behavioral patterns if there's anything that warrants, help. And if you do find someone in that state, it's not always easy for people to admit that they're not okay, especially when it comes to psychological changes. But I think we need to just be empathetic towards them and talk about how, help is available if they want to talk, that you are there available for them. But the difficulty is that with psychological problems, for someone to benefit, they must see that they have a problem. And I think that's where the trick is with helping someone. They need to see that they have a problem. And some of these psychological presentations, denial is a part of the issue. So, it becomes quite difficult. But I think it's just to make people aware out there that there is help in all the sectors to help people who are struggling with mental health challenges, and there is help. There's still a lot of work we need to do around the stigma to seeking help, but there is help available out there.
And of course, changing the narrative in terms of how we speak about these issues. Just on the impact of other factors, what impact then does, for instance, social media and the internet actually have on suicidal behavior? Today we were reporting how Australia has announced plans to introduce legislation this year to ban children from using social media platforms, citing potential risk to both physical and mental health.
With social media, there's so much pressure. And I always reiterate that social media is not a real place. The people, the things that they post out there are not a true reflection sometimes of how their life truly is in reality. So we need to understand that, unfortunately, if you are functioning from a lack of a place of lack, where you feel like you don't have certain things that people are posting about, then, that can, put you at risk potentially for mental health challenges, especially with the vulnerable groups. And, we need to understand that the social media has so much influence in our lives now, and it can cause a lot of stress for certain individuals, and this can put them at risk. And there's also this term called learned behavior, meaning that people can actually, because someone has committed suicide or attempted suicide or taken their lives or died by suicide, that people can actually copy that behavior and mimic that behavior, maybe because they were their role models or it was someone they looked up to. So it can be also a reenactment of someone's completed suicide. So we need to also be aware that, it can be learned, the behavior, or copied by someone who is, watching someone who completed this online.
One of the other things we don't talk more about is how those who have lost someone to suicide cope. I mean, can you share perhaps some coping mechanisms?
When someone does take their lives, it's always so tragic in that there's so much guilt, because people who remain have this survival guilt that they must navigate. And it's not always easy, because then they want to look back and reflect what they could have done better. I would recommend that they seek professional help, because it's not easy at all. And there's also religious beliefs around, someone who takes their lives that can also exacerbate the guilt. So there's really a need for someone to find that safe space, if a family member has taken their lives, to navigate all that emotions. And it's not just the family members, it's also the friends, the people around the community who could feel so guilty for not seeing the signs, or for ignoring or taking lightly what that person said before they took their lives. So I recommend professional help for people who, have a family member or someone close to them who has taken their lives.
A very difficult conversation indeed. Dr. Mashego, thank you so much for your time. Really do appreciate it. Dr. Keitumetse Mashego, clinical and sports psychologist, of course, talking to us there about World Suicide Prevention Day. One of the key takeouts there is that, of course, you can get help.